I am Etta, 34 years old, and I never thought my greatest achievement would become my family's target. After working my way from nothing to homeownership, I was shocked when my parents reappeared after 5 years of silence, demanding I sell my house to cover my sister Vanessa's $260,000 debt. When I refused their family helps family guilt trip, they broke in and destroyed my home. What they did not know was that this house held secrets that would ultimately protect me from their schemes. Before I share my story, where are you watching from today? Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from toxic family members who suddenly needed something from you. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our family appeared normal from the outside. My parents worked steady jobs, we lived in a decent neighborhood, and we never wanted for necessities. But beneath that veneer of middle-class stability was a dynamic that favored my younger sister Vanessa from the moment she was born. Vanessa was the golden child blessed with natural charisma and artistic talent that my parents showcased at every opportunity. School plays, art competitions, dance recitals, you name it. Vanessa was the star, and my parents were her biggest fans. Meanwhile, I was practical, studious, and responsible traits that earned me the role of family afterthought rather than any recognition. Etta is so independent, my mother would tell relatives, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She just does her own thing. What she meant was that I had learned to fend for myself because no one was coming to help me. By the time I was 16, I was working part-time jobs while maintaining honor roll grades. I saved every penny for college because my parents had made it clear that Vanessa's education would take priority. She has special talents that need nurturing, my father explained when I asked about their college savings plan. You are smart enough to figure it out. And figure it out I did. I worked 30 hours a week throughout high school, earned a partial scholarship, took out modest loans, and graduated with a business degree from a state university. Meanwhile, Vanessa attended an exclusive art school in New York, with my parents covering her tuition, apartment, and living expenses. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a financial services company in Chicago. The pay was modest, but I was determined to build a career. I lived frugally, took on roommates, packed lunches, and slowly paid down my student loans while building an emergency fund. Vanessa, meanwhile, bounced between creative ventures in New York, calling our parents whenever she needed more money for rent or supplies for her latest artistic vision. The breaking point came 5 years ago. Vanessa had convinced our parents to invest in her art gallery venture. She had found a perfect space in Brooklyn that would surely be the launchpad for her career. My parents, convinced of her inevitable success, emptied their retirement accounts to fund this dream. $60,000 later, the gallery opened with a lavish party that I watched through social media posts, unable to afford the flight to attend. 3 months later, the gallery was failing. Vanessa had miscalculated expenses, location, viability, and the competitive art market. She called me in tears one evening. "Mom and Dad are tapped out, Etta," she sobbed. "The gallery needs another $30,000 or everything is lost. You have savings, right? You always save." I did have savings, nearly $40,000, meticulously accumulated over years of sacrifice. It represented my security, my future, down payment, my proof that diligence mattered. When I hesitated, Vanessa grew angry. Family helps family. Etta, Mom and Dad gave everything for me. Now it is your turn. When I suggested a business plan or loan terms instead of an outright gift, she hung up on me. An hour later, my mother called. "How could you be so selfish?" she demanded. "Your sister is in crisis. This is her dream." "Mom, I worked hard for that money," I tried to explain. "I cannot just give it away without some plan for repayment." "So your money is more important than your sister, than this family?" My father called next, his disappointment palpable through the phone. "We raised you better than this, Etta. Family comes before money." The irony that they had never applied this principle to my education or career was apparently lost on them. When I stood firm, my father delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. "If you cannot support this family in its time of need, then perhaps you are not part of this family." I remember the silence that followed, the way my heart seemed to stop beating for a moment. "You do not mean that," I whispered. "Make your choice, Etta. Your sister or your money." I made my choice. I kept my savings, and true to his word, my father cut me out. My calls went unanswered. Birthday cards were returned. Holiday invitations never came. My mother blocked me on social media, and relatives were told I had abandoned the family in their time of need. The gallery failed anyway. Vanessa moved back home with my parents, her dream shattered, but her status as the wronged party intact. I was painted as the villain who could have saved everything but chose not to. Those first holidays alone were brutal. I cried through Thanksgiving, Christmas, and my birthday. I started therapy, trying to process the abandonment and conditional love that had defined my family relationships. My therapist helped me see that the dynamic had always been unhealthy, that I had been the family scapegoat while Vanessa was the golden child, and that setting financial boundaries was not just reasonable but necessary. Over the next few years, I poured myself into my career. I earned promotions, increased my salary, and continued my disciplined saving habits. My emergency fund grew back, and I started researching first-time home buying programs. If my family would not be my safety net, I would build one myself, brick by brick. 3 years after the estrangement, I found myself walking through a charming 1920s craftsman home in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. The moment I stepped onto the wide front porch, with its sturdy columns and traditional railing, something resonated deep within me. This house had stood for nearly a century, weathering countless storms, economic upheavals, and changing families. There was strength in its bones. The previous owner was the granddaughter of the original builder, the realtor explained, as we toured the interior. She lived here for 40 years and took immaculate care of the original features. I ran my fingers along the oak banister, admired the built-in bookshelves flanking the brick fireplace, and marveled at the leaded glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the hardwood floors. Unlike the sterile modern condos I had toured, this house felt like it had stories to tell, like it had survived. The price was at the upper end of my budget, but after years of disciplined saving and a recent promotion, I could manage it. I submitted an offer that evening, and after a brief negotiation, it was accepted. The day I signed the closing documents and received the keys was perhaps the proudest moment of my life. No one had handed this to me. No one had made it easy. This achievement was mine alone. The first few months were a flurry of activity. While the house was structurally sound, it needed cosmetic updates. I painted every room myself, staying up late after work and dedicating weekends to transformation. I refinished cabinets, replaced outdated light fixtures, and learned basic plumbing to install a new bathroom vanity. Each completed project felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. As I worked on the house, I also built a life around it. I invited colleagues over for dinner parties, joined the neighborhood association, and befriended the elderly couple next door, who shared stories about the area's history. I planted a vegetable garden in the backyard with advice from Mrs. Abernathy across the street, who had been growing tomatoes for 40 years. These connections formed a chosen family that filled the void left by my biological one. We celebrated holidays together, shared resources, and created new traditions. When Thanksgiving approached, instead of facing another lonely meal, I hosted a Friendsgiving potluck that filled my dining room with laughter and genuine affection. My career continued to flourish as well. My company promoted me to senior financial advisor, where I specialized in helping clients establish healthy relationships with money. There was a certain irony in the fact that the very boundaries that had cost me my family now allowed me to help others avoid similar pitfalls. Money is never just about money, I would tell my clients. It is about values, priorities, and boundaries. Clarifying those first makes the financial decisions much easier. My house became more than shelter. It was my sanctuary and achievement made tangible. Each mortgage payment felt like an affirmation. Each improvement reflected my values and tastes, not compromises made to please others. For the first time in my life, I was creating a space that honored my needs without apology. The peace I found in this new chapter sometimes made me wonder if the painful estrangement had actually been a disguised blessing. Without the constant drain of my family's expectations and Vanessa's crises, I discovered parts of myself that had never had room to grow. I made decisions based on my authentic desires rather than fear of disapproval. I recognized my own resilience and capacity for joy. 2 years into homeownership, I had created a life that felt genuinely mine. The ache of family estrangement had dulled to an occasional pang rather than the constant heartache of those early days. I had stopped checking my parents' social media accounts and no longer tensed when the phone rang, hoping it might be them. I had accepted that chapter was closed and found peace in the new story I was writing. That is why the call, when it finally came, caught me so completely off guard. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening. I had just finished watering my garden and was preparing a simple dinner when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was another telemarketer, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? Etta, it is Mom. The wooden spoon I had been using to stir pasta sauce clattered to the floor. 5 years of silence, and she called as casually as if we had spoken last week. My heart hammered against my ribs as conflicting emotions crashed through me: hope, anger, confusion, longing. Mom. My voice sounded strange, almost childlike. Yes, sweetie. How are you? The normalcy of her tone was disorienting. No acknowledgement of the years of silence, no apology, no explanation. Just how are you? As if checking in after a busy week. I am surprised to hear from you, I managed. Well, we have been thinking about you. Your father and I would love to have you over for dinner this Friday. Vanessa will be there too. It has been too long since we have all been together as a family. Too long since we have all been together. As if the estrangement had been a mutual decision or natural drift, rather than their explicit choice. I found myself agreeing to dinner before I had fully processed what was happening. After I hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, trying to make sense of the invitation. Why now? Why this sudden interest in reconnecting? Part of me, the lonely child who had always sought their approval, was elated at the possibility of reconciliation. Another part, the independent woman who had built a life without them, was deeply suspicious. I called my therapist the next day and scheduled an emergency session. What do you hope might happen at this dinner? Dr. Rivers asked, after I explained the situation. Best case scenario, they apologize, acknowledge how unfair they were, and we begin rebuilding a healthier relationship, I said. And what do you think is more likely to happen? I sighed. They want something. They would not be reaching out after all this time without a reason. Dr. Rivers nodded. It is important to go in with realistic expectations. What boundaries do you need to maintain for your own well-being? We spent the rest of the session preparing. I would not discuss my finances or career success unless they asked directly. I would not apologize for my decision 5 years ago. I would leave if the conversation became manipulative or abusive. Simple guidelines to protect the self-worth I had worked so hard to build. Friday evening arrived, and I found myself driving to my childhood home with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had chosen my outfit carefully professional, but not flashy put together, but not trying too hard. I brought a bottle of mid-priced wine as a hostess gift, normal enough to be polite, but not so expensive as to suggest financial excess. The house looked different than I remembered. The lawn was overgrown, the exterior paint peeling in places, and the flower beds my mother had once tended meticulously were now choked with weeds. These small signs of neglect unsettled me as I walked up to the front door. My father answered my knock, and I was struck by how much he had aged. His hair had gone completely gray, new lines carved deep channels around his mouth and eyes, and he had lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. "Etta," he said, his expression unreadable. "Come in." No hug, no warm welcome, just a perfunctory greeting that did little to bridge the 5-year gap. I stepped into the house and was immediately enveloped in a cloud of perfume as my mother emerged from the kitchen. "There she is," she exclaimed, with a brightness that seemed forced. She embraced me briefly, then held me at arm's length. "Let me look at you, still so serious. You need to smile more, sweetie." Just like that, I was transported back to every family gathering where my appearance, demeanor, or achievements had been found subtly lacking. I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Rivers's advice to stay centered in my adult self. "It is good to see you too, Mom," I said evenly. "The house looks familiar." She waved dismissively. "Oh, we have been meaning to do some updates. You know how it is never enough time or money for everything?" This casual reference to financial constraints raised my guard further. We moved to the living room, where I noticed several pieces of furniture were missing, replaced by cheaper alternatives. The expensive artwork that had once hung on the walls was gone, with family photos in discount frames taking their place. "Vanessa is running a little late," my mother explained, as she poured wine into mismatched glasses. "She had an appointment she could not miss. But she is so excited to see you." As we waited for my sister, my parents peppered me with questions that grew increasingly personal. "So, where are you living these days? Still, with that financial company, have you been promoted? Buying a home in this economy must be challenging. Are you still renting?" I answered truthfully, but vaguely mentioning my promotion, without specifying my salary, acknowledging home ownership, without discussing the value or location of my house. With each response, I noticed my parents exchanging glances, their interest in my financial situation becoming more apparent. "And you are still single?" my mother asked, with a familiar note of disappointment. "I am focused on my career and home right now," I replied. "It keeps me busy." "Your own home," my father repeated, his tone unreadable. "That must be nice." Before I could respond, the front door burst open, and Vanessa swept in like a hurricane. 5 years had changed her little, except perhaps to enhance her flair for dramatic entrances. She wore an obviously expensive designer dress, her hair professionally styled, diamond studs glittering in her ears. "Sorry I am late," she announced, dropping her luxury handbag on the coffee table. "The appointment ran over, and then traffic was insane. And oh my God, Etta." She rushed toward me, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "Look at you, all grown up and corporate. I have missed you so much." The contrast between her appearance and my parents' diminished circumstances was jarring, as was the performance of sisterly affection after years of silence. I hugged her back stiffly, already certain that this reunion had an agenda. Dinner confirmed my suspicions. As we ate a simple meal that was a far cry from the elaborate spreads, my mother, once prepared, the conversation kept circling back to finances. Vanessa dominated the table with stories of her latest artistic endeavors, name-dropping celebrities and describing glamorous events, while simultaneously complaining about the struggle of being a creative in today's economy. "The gallery scene is just so cutthroat now," she sighed, reaching for her third glass of wine. "And my last investor was such a nightmare. All these hidden fees and impossible interest rates." "Investor?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "For what project?" "My boutique," Vanessa said, as if it were obvious. "I opened a high-end art and fashion space in the city last year. It was going amazingly until all these bills started piling up." My father cleared his throat. "Your sister has had some cash flow issues recently." "Cash flow issues," Vanessa repeated, with a bitter laugh. "That is one way to put it. Try financial nightmare. The space needs renovations. The landlord will not cover vendors demanding payment. And my business partner bailed with half our operating capital." I set down my fork. "That sounds serious. Have you consulted a financial advisor?" "We do not need an advisor," my mother interjected. "We need family pulling together during hard times." And there it was. The true purpose of this reunion dinner laid bare in my mother's meaningful gaze. I took a sip of water, preparing myself for what would come next. "How bad is it?" I asked, looking directly at Vanessa. The question hung in the air as my sister suddenly became intensely interested in rearranging the food on her plate. $260,000. My father finally answered, his voice flat. I nearly choked on my water. 260,000 ments. How is that even possible? Vanessa lifted her chin defensively. It is not just the boutique. There were some personal loans too, and the credit cards I used for inventory, plus the renovations on my apartment. You renovated a rental apartment? I interrupted, unable to hide my shock. It is an investment in my personal brand, Vanessa snapped. Clients expect a certain aesthetic when they visit. I cannot exactly host potential buyers in some dumpy little place. My mother reached across the table to pat Vanessa's hand. Your sister has always had vision. Sometimes being ahead of the curve means taking financial risks. I looked around the table, trying to process what I was hearing. So you invited me here, after 5 years of silence, to tell me about Vanessa's debt. My parents exchanged glances before my father leaned forward. We have done everything we can, Etta. We have emptied our savings, taken a second mortgage on the house. We have even sold most of our valuables, my mother added, gesturing around the living room at the gaps where art and antiques had once stood. I am sorry to hear that, I said carefully, but I am not sure what this has to do with me. Another loaded silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat again. We understand you bought a house. The statement was so matter-of-fact, so seemingly unrelated to the previous conversation, that it took me a moment to make the connection. When I did, the room seemed to tilt slightly. Yes, I replied cautiously. I did. In this market, real estate values have increased significantly, my father continued, especially for older homes in established neighborhoods. My stomach dropped as I realized where this was heading. My house is not for sale. Now, Etta, my mother, cut in her voice, taking on the cajoling tone she had always used when trying to convince me to give Vanessa what she wanted as children. Nobody is saying you need to be homeless. But surely you could sell your house, help your sister get back on her feet, and buy something more modest for yourself. The audacity of the suggestion left me momentarily speechless. Vanessa took advantage of my shock to press forward. I did some research, and houses in your area are selling for $400,000 plus. Even after paying off your mortgage, you would have plenty left over to buy a condo and save my business. They had researched my neighborhood. They had calculated my potential equity before even speaking to me. The premeditation was stunning. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to sell the home I worked for years to afford, give Vanessa hundreds of thousands of dollars with no repayment plan, and downsize my life so she can continue a business that is already failing." "Family helps family," my mother exclaimed, tears welling in her eyes. "We have always taken care of each other." "Have we?" I asked quietly. "When have any of you taken care of me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. My father's face darkened. "We put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you." "You did the legal minimum required of parents," I corrected him. "Meanwhile, I worked through high school and college while you paid Vanessa's way entirely. I built my career and savings alone while you funded her gallery, her boutique, and apparently her luxury apartment renovations." "That was different," my mother insisted. "Vanessa has special talents that need nurturing, and I do not." The hurt child inside me surfaced briefly before I pushed her back down. "This is not about talent. This is about responsibility. I have been financially responsible my entire life. And now you want me to bail out Vanessa's irresponsibility." Vanessa slammed her hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "God, you have always been so jealous of me. This holier-than-thou act about being responsible is just your way of feeling superior." "Jealous?" I repeated incredulously. "Vanessa, I have worked for everything I have while watching you get endless handouts, and yet I never asked for a penny from any of you. Even now, after 5 years of silence, you have not asked how I am or what my life is like. You just want what I have." "We want this family back together," my father said sternly. "This situation could be a blessing in disguise, bringing us all closer. By me sacrificing everything, and Vanessa sacrificing nothing, I stood up from the table, my appetite long gone. Number, I will not sell my house. I will not pay Vanessa's debts. Her financial problems are not my responsibility." My mother's tears spilled over. "How can you be so cruel? We raised you better than this. Family helps family." "You cut me out of this family," I reminded her. "You made it very clear that I was only welcome if I handed over my savings. Nothing has changed except the amount you are demanding." My father stood as well, his face flushed with anger. "So that is it. You will let your sister lose everything. Let our retirement be wiped out. All because you will not share your good fortune." My good fortune, I laughed without humor. There was no fortune involved, just work sacrifice and smart decisions, none of which seems to be valued in this family. "You ungrateful, selfish child," my father spat, "after everything we have done for you." "What exactly have you done for me in the past 5 years, Dad? Or the 5 years before that? Please refresh my memory about all you have done for me." He had no answer, just sputtering rage. My mother was openly sobbing now, while Vanessa glared at me with a hatred that was startling in its intensity. "I should go," I said, gathering my purse. "This was a mistake." "If you walk out that door," my father warned, "do not expect another invitation." I paused at the threshold of the dining room. "You know what is interesting? 5 years ago, you gave me the exact same ultimatum, my sister or my money. And now here we are again, with nothing changed. Maybe the problem is not me, Dad. Maybe it is that you and Mom created this dynamic where Vanessa never faces consequences, and I am expected to forever clean up her messes." "How dare you blame us?" Vanessa shrieked. "This is all your fault." I shook my head sadly. "Goodbye. I wish you all the best with your financial troubles, but I cannot be your solution. As I walked to my car, I could hear my mother's wailing and my father's angry shouts through the open windows. My phone began buzzing with texts before I even reached the end of their driveway. Selfish bitch family helps family. Hope you enjoy your big empty house while we lose everything. I turned off my phone, hands shaking, as I drove home to the sanctuary I had built for myself. Only when I was safely inside door locked behind me did I allow myself to cry for the family I had never really had and now knew I never would. The texts continued throughout the weekend, escalating in both frequency and vitriol. By Monday morning, I had received over 50 messages from my parents and Vanessa, ranging from guilt trips to outright threats. Your selfishness is destroying this family. Dad had to go to the emergency room from stress. Hope you're happy. We know where you live. We'll remember this when you need help someday. I blocked their numbers, but they began calling from different phones. Emails flooded my inbox. Vanessa even created social media posts alluding to toxic family members who hoard wealth, while others suffer, tagging mutual acquaintances to ensure maximum humiliation. Relatives I had not spoken to in years suddenly contacted me, some curious about the drama, others joining the pressure campaign to help poor Vanessa. The family narrative had clearly been established. I was the villain, the cold-hearted sister with a big house who refused to save her struggling sibling. You know your cousin Sandy sold her car to help her brother through college, my aunt wrote in a particularly pointed email. That is what real family does. Despite knowing I had made the right decision, the barrage took its toll. I found myself second-guessing, wondering if I was indeed the selfish person they described. My therapist worked overtime that week. They are using classic manipulation tactics, Dr. Rivers reminded me. The guilt, the flying monkeys, the public shaming. These are attempts to control your behavior because rational discussion did not work. But what if they really do lose everything? I asked, voicing the fear that kept me up at night. That would be unfortunate, but it would be the consequence of their choices, not yours. You are not responsible for fixing problems you did not create, Etta. I took comfort in those words, and in the support of the genuine friends who knew the real me. My neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, brought over homemade bread when she noticed I looked stressed. My colleague Jackson offered legal advice about harassment. My friend Tara stayed with me for 2 nights, when the calls became particularly aggressive. Just as the storm seemed to be subsiding, my doorbell rang on a Saturday morning. I peered through the peephole to see my parents standing on my front porch, looking subdued and almost contrite. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not stepping aside to let them in. "We came to talk," my mother said softly. "May we come in, please?" Against the warnings sounding in my head, I allowed them inside. They stood in my entryway, taking in the home they had never seen, with poorly disguised assessment. "This is lovely," my mother offered. "You have done well for yourself." "Thank you," I replied stiffly. "What did you want to talk about?" My father sighed heavily. "We may have been hasty the other night. It was a shock seeing you after so long, and the stress of this situation with Vanessa has been overwhelming. We miss you," my mother added, her eyes welling with practiced tears. "All this fighting is not what we want. We are family despite everything." Their apparent change of heart seemed suspicious, but part of me desperately wanted to believe it was genuine. The little girl who had always craved their approval saw this as the opening she had waited for. "I miss what we could have been too," I admitted. "But I cannot ignore how toxic things have become." "Would you show us around?" my mother asked, changing the subject. "We want to see the home you have created." The tour was awkward but civil. They commented on my renovations, asked about the neighborhood, and made small talk that carefully avoided any mention of money or Vanessa. It felt almost normal, this performance of interested parents, and I found myself relaxing slightly. Until we reached my home office. This is where I work sometimes. I explained, showing them the room I had set up with a desk computer and filing cabinets. My mother wandered over to my desk, eyeing the papers there with obvious interest. So this is where you keep all your important documents, mortgage papers, and such. The casual question sent alarm bells ringing. Some of them, most, are digital now. My father opened my closet without asking, noting the file boxes stored there. Very organized. Always were meticulous about your things. As the tour continued, I noticed my mother lingering by the key hook near my back door, where I kept my spare house key. She seemed to be mentally noting its location, her eyes darting between the keys and me to see if I noticed her interest. When we returned to the living room, the conversation inevitably circled back to Vanessa. "We have been thinking about options," my father began cautiously. "Perhaps there is a compromise that could help everyone." Such as I asked already, knowing where this was heading. "What if you took out a home equity loan instead of selling?" my mother suggested brightly, as if this brilliant alternative had just occurred to her. "You could keep your house and still help your sister." And there it was. The true purpose of their visit, the reason for the sudden change in tactics. They still wanted my house's value, just through a different mechanism. A loan that I would be responsible for repaying, I clarified, while giving the money to Vanessa, who has demonstrated she cannot manage finances. We would help with the payments, my father offered unconvincingly. It would be a family effort. "Like the family effort to pay for my college?" I asked pointedly. "Or the family effort to support me when I was starting my career?" Their expressions hardened at my refusal to play along. "I think it is time for you to leave," I said firmly. "You really are determined to see us suffer," my mother said, her conciliatory tone vanishing instantly. "After all we have sacrificed for you." "Please go," I repeated, moving toward the door. "This conversation is over." To my surprise, they complied without further argument. My father even nodded stiffly, as they left almost respectfully. "We will be in touch," he said. "Think about what we discussed." Their too easy departure left me uneasy. As I watched them drive away, I could not shake the feeling that this was not the end of their campaign, merely a change in strategy. My instincts screamed that something was wrong, that their reconnaissance of my home had a purpose beyond reconciliation. I double-checked all my locks that night and made a mental note to look into a security system. The peace I had cultivated in my home felt suddenly fragile, threatened by the very people who should have been its most stalwart defenders. 3 days after my parents' visit, I returned home from work to find my front door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped as I approached, cautiously hearing muffled sounds coming from inside. Pulling out my phone to call 911, I hesitated, wondering if I was overreacting to a door I might have failed to close properly that morning. That hesitation vanished when I heard a crash, followed by my mother's voice. "Check the office again. The deed has to be here somewhere." I completed the call, whispering my address to the dispatcher and explaining that my house was being burglarized. The operator advised me to stay outside and wait for officers, but when I heard another crash and the sound of breaking glass, something in me snapped. This was my home, my sanctuary, being violated by the very people who should have respected it most. I pushed the door open fully, and the scene that greeted me stole my breath. My living room was in shambles. The bookshelves had been emptied books thrown to the floor. Couch cushions were slashed open stuffings scattered across the hardwood. Picture frames lay smashed, and there, written across my wall in what looked like lipstick, was a single word: selfish. "What are you doing?" I screamed, causing my father to whirl around from where he had been pulling out desk drawers in the corner. Etta! My mother emerged from the hallway, looking startled but not remorseful. You are home early. Early! This is my house. What have you done? I gestured wildly at the destruction around me. Vanessa appeared from my bedroom, clutching a stack of papers, found the mortgage documents she announced before seeing me in the doorway. Her triumphant expression faltered only slightly. You do not understand, my father said, his tone oddly calm given the circumstances. This is for your own good, for the family. My own good. You broke into my house and destroyed my things. I was shaking now, phone still in hand with the 911 dispatcher listening. We are teaching you a valuable lesson about priorities, my mother said, as if this explained everything. Things can be replaced. Family cannot. Is that what this is? A lesson. I looked around at the devastation of my carefully curated home. Breaking and entering. Destruction of property. These are crimes. Do not be so dramatic, Vanessa, scoffed, still holding my financial documents. It is just stuff. Stuff you value more than your own sister, apparently. The police are on their way. I informed them, my voice steadier than I felt. You all need to leave. Now. Instead of looking concerned, my father actually laughed. The police. You would call the police on your own parents. They will not do anything. We are family. We have every right to be here. You have no right to be here, I countered. I did not invite you in. You broke my door and destroyed my property. We made you! My mother hissed, a viciousness in her expression I had never seen before. Everything you have comes from us. This house, your job, all of it exists because we created you. The twisted logic stunned me momentarily. In that pause, sirens became audible in the distance. You are really doing this, Vanessa said incredulously. Calling the cops on us when all we needed was a little help. $260,000 is nothing to you with this house. It is everything to me, I replied. This house represents years of work, sacrifice, and independence that none of you have ever respected or acknowledged. The sirens grew louder and panic finally registered on my parents' faces. My father grabbed for the papers in Vanessa's hands. We need to go, he urged, moving toward the back door. No, I blocked their path. You stay right here and explain to the officers what you were doing. Move, Etta, my father demanded, his voice low and threatening. Or, what? You will hurt me too. Destroy more of my things. Go ahead. Add assault to the charges. Blue lights flashed through my windows as patrol cars pulled up outside. My parents and Vanessa exchanged frantic looks, their plan clearly unraveling. This is just a family disagreement, my mother said loudly, as if rehearsing what she would tell the police. Nothing for authorities to be concerned about. A sharp knock at the door was followed by an authoritative voice. Police, open up. I moved to answer it, keeping my eyes on my family. 2 officers entered, taking in the destruction with professional assessment. What happened here, ma'am? The first officer asked. I came home to find my parents and sister had broken in. As you can see, they have destroyed much of my property and were attempting to steal documents. My voice was surprisingly calm as I pointed to the papers still clutched in my father's hand. That is ridiculous, my mother protested. We are her family. We were just visiting. Did you have permission to enter the home? The officer asked her directly. We do not need permission. We are her parents. The second officer, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, shook her head. That is not how the law works, ma'am. Adult children's homes are not extensions of parental property. This is all a misunderstanding, my father tried, his authoritative tone, failing to impress the officers. We were concerned about Etta and came to check on her. The door was open. and the destroyed furniture. The writing on the wall. The first officer gestured to the selfish, scrawled across my living room. She has always been dramatic, Vanessa cut in. She probably did that herself to frame us. The female officer raised an eyebrow. And those documents in your hand, did she plant those too? As the officers separated my family members for questioning, the reality of the situation seemed to finally dawn on them. This was not going to be dismissed as a family squabble. There would be consequences. My neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the police presence. Mrs. Abernathy stood on my lawn, concern etched on her kind face. Mr. Jenkins from across the street was filming with his phone, having apparently captured my family being escorted to separate patrol cars for questioning. Inside, I gave my statement explaining the history of estrangement, the recent demands for money, the suspicious visit days earlier, and finding them destroying my home today. They were specifically looking for my mortgage documents and deed, I explained. My sister is in significant debt, and they want me to sell my house to pay it off. The officers took photographs of the damage, collected evidence, and assured me they were taking the matter seriously. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I did not hesitate. Yes, all of them. As they prepared to transport my family to the station, my mother's composure finally broke. You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. Family helps family. This is not help, I told her, my voice breaking slightly. This is abuse, and it stops today. Only when the patrol cars had driven away with my family inside did I allow myself to fully absorb what had happened. Standing in the wreckage of my living room, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the life I had built, I began to shake uncontrollably. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at my side, wrapping a steadying arm around my shoulders. You come stay with me tonight, dear, she said firmly. We will deal with this mess tomorrow. I nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to speak, and let her guide me away from the broken pieces of both my home and my family. In the days following the break-in, I discovered exactly what my family had been searching for, and why they had targeted my home office with such determination. While cleaning up the mess they had left behind, I found an envelope that had fallen behind my desk in the chaos. Inside was a document I had nearly forgotten about: the historical designation certificate for my house. When I had purchased the property, the previous owner had mentioned that the house was listed on the local historical registry due to its architectural significance and connection to a prominent early 20th century builder. At the time, I had seen this as a charming detail that added character to my home. What I had not fully appreciated was the legal protection this status provided. As a designated historical property, my house could not be sold without approval from the Historical Society. Any buyer would be bound by strict renovation guidelines and preservation requirements. Additionally, certain architectural elements, including the original woodwork and leaded glass windows, were specifically protected and could not be removed or significantly altered. This documentation explained why my family had been so desperate to find my property papers. A standard sale would have been flagged during the process, revealing restrictions that would make the house far less valuable as a quick source of cash. They had likely planned to use my documents to explore ways around these restrictions, or possibly even attempt to forge my signature on sale papers before these issues came to light. The realization sent me straight to a lawyer's office. Jessica Reynolds specialized in both real estate and family law, making her uniquely qualified to handle my situation. What they attempted was highly illegal, she confirmed after reviewing my case. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, attempted theft of documents, and what sounds like a planned real estate fraud. What should I do now? I asked, still feeling shaken. First, we file for a restraining order. Given the damage to your home and the clear intent to commit financial fraud, you have strong grounds. Second, we document everything for the criminal case the district attorney is building. Third, we file a civil suit for damages to your property. Over the next several weeks, these legal proceedings became my focus. The restraining order was granted without hesitation when the judge saw the photographs of my destroyed living room and the threatening messages my family had sent. The criminal case moved forward as well, with all 3 family members facing multiple charges. What I had not anticipated was Vanessa's reaction when confronted with actual consequences. During the restraining order hearing, she broke down on the stand. "It was not supposed to go this far," she sobbed. "We just needed the papers to see what options there were. Dad said we would not take anything, just look." Under questioning, she revealed the full extent of her financial troubles: maxed out credit cards, multiple high-interest loans, lease agreements for luxury items she could not afford, and a boutique business that had never turned a profit. The $260,000 debt was actually closer to $300,000 when all accounts were tallied. More shocking was her admission that our parents had been enabling this behavior for years, emptying their retirement accounts, taking out a reverse mortgage on their home, and even selling family heirlooms to cover Vanessa's expenses. Their financial situation was far more dire than I had realized, with bankruptcy looming and possibly foreclosure. "We did not know what else to do," my mother testified her. Earlier defiance replaced by dejection. "Vanessa needed help, and you were the only one with resources left. Did you consider asking me for a reasonable loan with a payment plan?" the judge asked. "Rather than demanding your daughter sell her home or breaking in to steal documents." "She would have said no," my father muttered. "She already refused to help 5 years ago." Setting boundaries is not refusing to help, the judge observed. It is establishing healthy parameters for assistance, something this family seems to struggle with understanding. The restraining order was granted for 1 year, with provisions for extension if necessary. My family was prohibited from contacting me directly, coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, or discussing me on social media platforms. The criminal charges resulted in probation for my parents and community service for Vanessa, along with mandatory financial counseling for all 3. The judge made it clear that the leniency was conditional on their compliance with the restraining order and completion of family therapy. The civil case settled out of court when my parents' insurance agreed to cover the damage to my home. The settlement provided enough to not only repair what had been destroyed, but to make improvements I had been saving for, including a comprehensive security system. As the legal matters resolved, the emotional healing began. The violation of my home had left invisible scars that were slower to heal than the physical damage. I jumped at unexpected noises, checked locks repeatedly, and slept poorly for months. But with time and continued therapy, these reactions began to fade. My community proved to be the greatest source of healing. Neighbors I had barely known before the incident rallied around me, helping with repairs and checking in regularly. Mrs. Abernathy brought dinner every Wednesday. Mr. Jenkins installed motion sensor lights around my property. Colleagues covered my workload when court appearances required time off. These connections formed a support network stronger than any I had known growing up. Unlike the conditional love my biological family had offered, these relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine care. 6 months after the break-in, my house was not only restored, but improved. New paint covered the hateful word that had been scrawled on my wall. Upgraded furniture replaced the damaged pieces. The garden flourished under Mrs. Abernathy's expert guidance. And most importantly, the sense of security and peace I had cultivated before was gradually returning. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Vanessa had entered a serious financial counseling program and was working a retail job for the first time in her life. My parents had downsized to an apartment and were adjusting to retirement without the cushion they had expected. These changes, while difficult for them, were perhaps the first steps toward healthier patterns. 1 year after the incident, as the restraining order approached its expiration date, I received a letter from Vanessa, forwarded through my lawyer, as permitted by the court. Unlike her previous communications, this one contained no demands, accusations, or guilt trips. Instead, it offered what appeared to be a genuine apology. "I am sorry for what we did to your home and your trust," she wrote. "I am beginning to understand how my financial choices affected everyone, and how unfair our expectations of you were. I do not expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I am working on myself and taking responsibility for my actions for the first time." I did not respond immediately. The apology was a positive step, but trust once shattered could not be instantly restored by words alone. I decided to wait and see if changed behavior would follow the changed rhetoric. The experience had taught me that family is not defined by blood, but by respect, support, and healthy boundaries. The people who showed up for me during my darkest moments, who helped rebuild not just my home, but my sense of safety, were my true family. As I sat on my restored front porch on a warm evening, watching fireflies dance across my garden, I felt a sense of peace that had been hard-won. My home remained my sanctuary, made stronger by the challenges it had withstood. And I remained my own person, no longer seeking approval from those who had proven they could not give it unconditionally. Have you ever had to protect yourself from family members who felt entitled to what you worked hard for? The journey from guilt to self-protection is never easy, but it is sometimes necessary. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on where you would draw the line with family financial demands. And if this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to support more conversations about setting healthy boundaries. Remember, true family lifts you up rather than tears you down. And sometimes the family we choose brings more healing than the one we were born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength in your own boundary-setting journey.